So when exactly was Jesus crucified? Mark says it was the 3rd hour of the day. John says it was the 6th hour of the day. And this leads some people to believe that the Bible is actually contradicting itself. So let me know in the comment section below. What time do you think Jesus was crucified? The 3rd hour according to Mark? Was it the 6th hour according to John? Let me know in the comment section below and let's get started. Now, as I've kind of discussed already, some people look at these two pieces of text in Mark and John and say, one is saying the 3rd hour of the day, Jesus was crucified. One is saying the 6th hour of the day. Is the Bible contradicting itself? So what I recommend you do first and foremost is look at the narrative, okay? So follow the narrative. These two Gospels specifically mention the 3rd hour and the 6th hour. So it's not like someone's telling you a story or telling you something or anything like that. It actually does say that. And it's speaking specifically in both scenarios about Jesus' actual crucifixion, okay? So all you have to do following the narrative is to say, okay, what happens after these events? What happens before these events? And once you do that, it will lead you to ascertain that, yes, it's talking about the specific time. Okay, so it's not talking about something different here, and it's not talking about something specifically different here. It's actually talking about the crucifixion. So that leaves some with a dilemma. Okay, how do you reconcile these two pieces of text? Now, one breakdown of this text is that this was in fact a copyist error, and I'm not going to spend much time on that. But it's basically that a scribe writing in John's scenario basically wrote the wrong time, and that gets into a whole other thing that I'm not going to spend most of the time in. I'm going to give you what I think is a more plausible scenario to why one says the 3rd hour and one says the 6th hour. So we've mentioned this is all happening at the same time, and I've mentioned the things happening after are the same and the things happening before are the same. So in both accounts, Mark and John, what happens before this is Jesus is basically talking with Pilate, okay? And the two different scenarios give us more insights about the scenario, not necessarily the same piece of information, but we can clearly see it's the same scenario that happens before it. Now, bear in mind, there's two things I want you to focus on, okay? Jesus was taken by the Jews at night time. He was in the garden with his disciples. Judas came along, gave him a kiss to showcase that was him. They took him by night, okay, to Caiaphas, etc. Okay, so we know he was taken in the night time. Oh, and we know in the daytime, he's going to get crucified. Now, the second thing I want you to identify, which I think gives you the answer to this, is earlier on in this account, which gives us a key example. And what it basically says is it talks about how it was early, okay? So when you think about this and you reconcile this whole situation, you say, hold on, Jesus was taken in the nighttime. He has the whole scenario with Caiaphas, all that kind of stuff. Peter denies him 3 times. They basically ship him off to Pilate to get judged, and then ultimately Pilate crucifies him, okay? That was in the nighttime. Right before this whole scenario of Pilate, John writes that it was early, okay? So this kind of gives us a hint here. How can you categorize the time Jesus is getting taken in the nighttime and categorize it as early, okay, if it's supposed to be happening in the nighttime? That leads you to believe, which I believe is the more plausible view, which is Mark categorizing this based on the Jewish time, where the 3rd hour of the day would be categorized as 9 a.m. roughly. And it would give you the time of the 6th hour of the day, which would be 6. So the Jew would focus on time from evening to evening, going all the way back to Genesis. And John here was categorizing the Roman time, which was categorized from midnight to midnight, which is sort of what we do in today's day and age. So when it talks about the 6th hour, when Pilate presented Jesus and said, this is your king, okay, this would have been talking about 6 a.m., not 12 p.m. at noon, where he still has to go off to get crucified, when Mark's basically talking about how he's crucified at 9 a.m. already. This will give you time for Pilate to present him at 6 a.m. and say, behold, here's your king, and then for him to go through all of the other different procedures which happened after Pilate presented him to the point he actually gets to Golgotha and is actually crucified, which will make sense, because if we're going from 6 a.m. based on a midnight to midnight calendar, it gives the narrative an easy window to fit in all the different things that come after, between this happening and just actually getting crucified 3 hours later, okay, at 9 a.m. So when you factor in that the accounts are actually the same after and before, and you factor in that just before John talks about the 6th hour, where Pilate presents Jesus, he says it was early, okay? And there's no way it could have been early if he was actually taken in the night time, unless he's talking about things from a different perspective, a different time zone, which would be the Roman time zone, which would make it 6 a.m. when Jesus is presented by Pilate, which gives them 3 more hours additional to get him to the cross at Golgotha and actually be crucified. So if that all makes sense to you, like the video, subscribe to the channel, and let me know your thoughts below in the comment section. And what I recommend you do next is watch this video right here next. It's a great video for you to watch because it's another question answered about Jesus, which you might want to know as well. Thanks and take care.